Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Lucinda Vakura. I'm the Vice President of Business Development and Marketing with Alford Group. I use the pronouns she, her, and today I'm wearing a blue top and I'm sitting against a white wall as a background. We're so excited you're here. Our event today is titled Giving USA 2023 Beyond the Numbers. And before we dive in, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Alford Group and walk you through some webinar logistics before we get started. So a little bit about Alford Group. I realize most of you, many of you are very familiar with who we are and what we do. But for those of you who may not be, Alford Group is a full service nationwide consultancy serving the nonprofit community. We offer 6 flagship services listed here on your screen: fundraising, strategic planning, leadership development, interim staffing, data management, and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are a proud member and sponsor of AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, a certified women's business enterprise, and a member of the Giving Institute, which houses the Giving USA Foundation, which puts out the Giving USA report each year. Of course, you can find more about who we are and what we do at our website, which is alford.com. I do want to take a second to acknowledge the land on which we reside. Of course, you all are joining us from across the country, but I want to acknowledge Chicago, which is the headquarters of Alford Group. Chicago is located on the traditional unceded homelands of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes, such as the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, and Fox, also called this area home. The region has long been a center for Indigenous people to gather, trade, and maintain kinship ties. A few housekeeping items. I want to let you know that today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording via email within 24 hours. Immediately after the event concludes, you'll be prompted to fill out a very short online survey. We encourage you to do so. It's really short, 4 questions, and it'll help us plan for our future webinars and provide us with helpful feedback. All of you are in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar, but the chat is open. We encourage you to use the chat, pop in comments, reactions, say hello, where you're from. We definitely want this to be interactive as we go. If you have a question for a presenter or a panelist today, please use the Q&A function. So separate from the chat, there's a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If you open that, you can type in your question and that will come to the panelists. We will answer as many questions as we can at the end of today's event. And then finally, we invite you to join the conversation on social media as well. We'll be live tweeting and posting, and you can join that conversation by using our Twitter handle, which is @the_Alford Group, and the hashtag Giving USA 2023, which is here in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Without further ado, I want to turn things over to our moderator today. Brenda B. Asare is President and CEO of Alford Group, and just last month took over the reins of the Giving Institute as chair, where she'll be chair for the next 2 years with the Giving Institute. So excited for all of you to be here, and I'll turn things over to you, Brenda.
Thank you so much, Lucinda. Thank you, friends, for taking the time to join us for this webinar on future-proofing philanthropy. Yes, while we cannot predict the future, we can become better informed about the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. This information will help us be more effective change makers, enablers, and champions for a more just and equitable world. In this webinar today, Michelle Bibbs and Jaron Bernstein, my Alford Group colleagues, will take a brief look back at 2022, and then we will look forward with a panel of nonprofit leaders, visionaries, and philanthropists who are not only passionate about the specific work they do, they are also passionate about lifting up the sector as a whole. They will share their perspective on how to build a more resilient and inclusive philanthropic ecosystem. The overarching goal of this webinar is to equip you with the insights and resources you need to future-proof your fundraising efforts by building deeper donor connections which will lead to greater generosity and lasting impact. Without further ado, let's get started. I will turn it over to Michelle and Jaron. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Hello to each of you joining us. I am so excited to be with you today. I am Michelle Bibbs, a senior consultant at Alford Group. My pronouns are she, her, and today I am wearing an orange jacket and red-rimmed glasses. I have brown hair and I'm sitting in front of a white background behind me and a red brick wall to my left. And I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleague Jaron for this part of our presentation.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jaron Bernstein. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a consultant with Alford Group. I am a light-skinned man of Ashkenazi Jewish descent with a reddish brown beard and short hair. I'm wearing a light purple button-up shirt and a blue blazer. And I'm sitting in front of a blurred out background of my home office, which is located on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people, also now known as Seattle, Washington. So we're really grateful for you all taking the time today, and we're excited to get into some of the data.
We're excited to share today with you highlights from the Giving USA 2023 Annual Report on Philanthropy. We will give an overview of Giving USA and how the report is compiled, followed by important takeaways from this year's snapshot. This report reflects total philanthropic giving in 2022 and provides an overview of the sources of giving and the recipients by sectors. Many of you are familiar with Giving USA, and many of you may be learning about it for the first time. If you would like to have your own copy of the full report for use at your organization, email us at info@alford.com to request a 30% discount on your order. Let's begin with the major takeaways. We saw record generosity in 2020 and 2021, and following those extraordinary years, giving overall was down in 2022. Secondly, foundation giving made up a significantly larger percentage of overall giving. And lastly, principles for fundraising endure. Focused strategies to cultivate and build donor relationships remain essential.
So before we dive into those takeaways a little deeper, what is Giving USA? As Michelle said, some of you may be familiar, some of you may be learning about it for the first time. Giving USA is the oldest and most comprehensive report on charitable giving in the United States. It's published by the Giving USA Foundation, as Lucinda said, which is part of the Giving Institute, an association comprised of national firms such as Alford Group. Our consultancy has been a member of the Institute and a significant donor to the research that is reflected in this report for over 30 years. And as Lucinda mentioned, we're thrilled that Brenda has assumed the role of board chair of the Giving Institute as of last month. So we're really excited to see her take the Giving Institute off in a new direction or continue on its great path. The report is researched and written by the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, and as I mentioned, made possible by contributions from the Giving Institute member firms, foundations, and other donors. It's a really big data project and represents data from 128 million households, 1.48 million nonprofits, 90,000 foundations, and businesses of all sizes. As we dive into some of our takeaways, we'd love for you to drop in the chat. How do you at your organization use this data from Giving USA if you are familiar with it? What what purpose do you utilize the data for? And we'll keep going, but please drop that into the chat. So the first key takeaway is that in 2022, overall giving was down in the United States, but that's not the whole picture. So again, before we jump in, we have a quick poll for you all, and we're hoping that you can answer this quick question, which is, how was fundraising for your organization in 2022? We know that some of you may be on fiscal years that are not aligned with the calendar year, but in your best estimation in the calendar year of 2022, did your organization raise more money than in 2021? Did your organization raise less money in 2022 than 2021? Or did you raise about the same in both 2022 and 2021? That will just give us a sense of where everyone in the Zoom room is at as we look at the data a little bit more closely. So I'll give you a second to answer, and my colleagues, when they think there are enough folks who have answered, they'll close the poll, and we'll take a look. So thinking about overall giving at your organization, again, across the calendar year, which may or may not be aligned with your fiscal year. And so I'm seeing now that it looks like about half of you, a little less than half of you, raised more money in 2022 than 2021, which is very interesting. And then about a quarter of you raised the same amount in 2022 as 2021. So that's really interesting to keep in mind, the experience of those of us in the room as we get into the overall data for 2022. So as I said, after soaring past $500 billion in 2021 to $516.65 billion, giving in 2022 totaled $499.33 billion, which is a 3.4% decline in current or today's dollars. In inflation-adjusted terms, this represents a total decline in total giving of 10.5%. So Giving USA data is available in both today's dollars, current dollars, or inflation-adjusted dollars. And we're going to be focusing on inflation-adjusted data because that gives a little bit more accurate picture when you're comparing year to year based on the value of the dollar. So here we can see the trend in total giving since 1982. As I said, total charitable giving in 2022 reached $499 billion, which is a decline of $58.58 billion when adjusted for inflation from 2021 to 2022. Note that this decline in 2022 comes on the heel of the most generous year ever. Again, 2021 giving surpassed $500 billion for the first time ever as people responded to the needs related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Since 1982, adjusted for inflation, total charitable giving has declined 9 times. And as you'll see in a moment, inflation-adjusted declines in total giving have often come at times of economic uncertainty. Here we see the same information represented in a slightly different way. The green bars on this graph represent years of economic recession, and the bars themselves are the total giving in inflation-adjusted dollars. And you can see how total giving tends to decline or remain flat in those time periods, with the notable exception of the COVID-19 related recession in 2020. When considering the decline in total giving in 2022, it's important to remember that 1 year's worth of data is not enough to represent a trend. In fact, if you look further back, giving is trending upwards since 1982. Total giving in inflation-adjusted dollars has grown at an average annual rate of 2.6% or $7.84 billion. And over the most recent decade, from 2013 to 2022, total inflation-adjusted giving grew by 20.2%, which is nearly double the growth of the previous 10 years. So what are some reasons that might explain why total giving was down in 2022? There are a number of economic factors that influence how much donors give, and several key ones were in play in 2022. The first being that disposable personal income, or how much spendable income a household has available after taxes have been paid, was down 0.1% in 2022. Which is a 7.5% decline when adjusted for inflation. And this is a really key determinant of how much households then give with the income they have available. Also, total giving has tended to track with the growth and decline of the S&P 500, which is often sort of a signal of the overall health of the economy. And when adjusted for inflation in 2022, the S&P 500 declined by 25.4%. Similarly, giving as a percentage of GDP was down to 2%, which is a decline from 2.3% in 2020, a 40-year high. And finally, as we all likely know, inflation was at a 40-year high in 2022 at 8%, which certainly influenced everything else. We're talking a lot about inflation-adjusted numbers, and you can see how that has an impact. We do know that inflation is coming down over the first part of 2023, and I believe the last data I saw has it at about 3%. So this could be a signal that households in the US are starting to see some relief. All in all, these economic factors certainly combine to influence a decline in total overall giving in 2022.
Our second takeaway is giving by foundations grew as a share of total giving. This demonstrates the increasing prominence of foundation-directed giving. Giving by foundations, which includes grants made by independent, community, and operating foundations, amounted to $105.21 billion, or 21% of all gifts made in 2022. This is an increase of 2.5% from 19% in 2021. Giving by bequest amounted to $46.5 billion, or 9% of all gifts made in 2022. What's interesting about bequests is giving from estates with assets below $1 million amounted to $11.86 billion, which is more than giving from estates from 1 to 10 million. This demonstrates the importance of establishing a planned giving program that doesn't overlook donors with small estates. Direct giving by individuals comprised 64% of total giving in 2022 at $319.04 billion. And lastly, giving by corporations, which includes cash and in-kind contributions from corporate giving programs, as well as grants and gifts through corporate foundations, comprised 6% of total giving in 2022, or $29.48 billion, performing more strongly than other sources amid unusual economic conditions. In this view, we see all forms of individual giving, including 64% indirect individual giving, 9% from bequest, and about half of foundation giving coming from family or individual foundations together totals 83.5% of all giving from individuals in 2022. And here we'll take a look at changes in giving by source from the record levels in 2021 to 2022. Charitable giving by bequest, when adjusted for inflation, declined by 5.3%. Giving by foundations, when adjusted for inflation, declined by 5% in 2022. Yet even though it was down, it was a larger share of philanthropic giving in 2022. Giving by corporations, when adjusted for inflation, declined by 4.2%. And when adjusted for inflation, giving by individuals declined by 13.4%. At times, we hear a lot about very large gifts by some of the wealthiest Americans. Such gifts reached a total of nearly $13.96 billion in 2022. Mega gifts are defined as $500 million or more, up from $450 million in 2021. So our question now for you is, what percent of individual giving do you think mega gifts make up? We invite you to drop your answers in the chat. Do you think it's 5 to 15%, 16 to 25%, 26 to 50%, or more than 50%? Oh, I see answers starting to fly in. Okay. We'll let a few more people chime in before the big reveal. Okay, they're slowing down. The answer is 5%. Mega gifts in 2022 represent the same percentage of individual giving as they did in 2021. So we may think about ways to engage mega donors, but the fact is, while transformational, these gifts represent a small percentage of total giving. We see how giving by foundations, which is shown in the middle of the bars in the bright green, has grown as a percentage of total giving over the last 40 years. From 6% in the first 5-year period during the 1980s on the left to 19% in the most recent 5-year period beginning in 2018. While all 4 sources experienced a decline in total dollars when adjusted for record inflation in 2022, foundation giving has experienced growth as a share of overall giving over time. So having unpacked the 2022 snapshot in terms of sources of giving, here we shift our lens to the recipient sectors of giving. When we look at where American generosity was directed, religion, on the top right in dark green, continues to receive the largest share of giving at 27%, but is decreasing. Human services received 14%, eclipsing education for the first time in 2022 at 13% to round out the top 3 sectors and more than 50% of recipients. In this graph, we see what changed among sectors. When adjusted for the high rates of inflation, giving declined, as shown in the dark green bars on the left, for all but 2 of the major recipient sectors. Among these 9 sectors, giving to foundations, primarily family foundations, and to international affairs, shown in the dark green bars, increased for 2022, even when adjusted for inflation. And when we add to foundations and international affairs, giving to education, to health, and to arts, culture, and humanities over the past 2 years remains above their 2020 levels, shown in the cumulative percentages on the right. So just as we looked at 5-year increments of giving by source over the arc of Giving USA, in this snapshot, we can see the changing percentages of overall giving to sectors. beginning with giving to religious organizations in dark teal at the top, declining as a share of total giving, beginning in 1983 when it received 58% of the total, down to 29% of the total during the last 5-year period from 2018 to 2022. The education subsector, in bright teal right underneath, has received between 11% and 14% of total contributions in the past 4 decades. Foundations, in the olive color in the middle, have received between 5% and 12% of total contributions over the last 40 years. Having explored the economic factors that influence giving in 2022, viewed giving by sources and recipient sectors through the lens of the span of 40 years and shifts in recent years, we'll now go to our third key takeaway.
What does this all mean for us as fundraisers is probably a question you're asking yourselves. We know we have an esteemed panel of professionals who will share their perspective in just a moment, but we wanted to really quickly provide Alford Group's take, which is that despite a decline in overall giving, strategies to cultivate, build, and retain donor relationships over the long term remain essential. We have seen our clients grow as they build upon the resilience and innovation developed in the pandemic era. We encourage you to continue to build upon this resiliency by leveraging digital tools and sustaining existing and attracting new donors. In brief, we encourage you to continue to evolve by expanding your digital presence. As research shows, mobile devices are now responsible for the majority of all visits to nonprofit websites, and to adopt new technology to help you with your work, such as AI. And also double down on building relationships with your current donors. With inflation trending down from the historic high in 2022, there is potential for giving to trend up, making engagement with current and potential new donors more important than ever.
So to summarize, giving was down in 2022 from its historic high of over $500 billion in the previous year. Giving to foundations was the 4th largest recipient sector of giving, and giving by foundations made up a larger share of overall giving. And growing and deepening relationships with donors remains essential.
Again, don't forget to email us at info@alfordgroup.com to request a 30% discount on your order of the full Giving USA 2023 report. With that, we're really excited to hear more from our panelists, and I'll turn it back over to Brenda to help lead that conversation. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Jaron, for giving us that look back to 2022. Now, as our panel come on screen, we want to look forward to what lies ahead. We are just so pleased to have joining us as our panel this afternoon, 3 esteemed leaders in the sector. We'd like to thank Stephanie Ellis-Smith, CEO and Principal of Phila Engaged Giving, Alex Jakana, Program Officer with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Dilnaz Waraich, President of the WF Fund. So panelists, on the heel of 2 record-breaking years of generosity, much ado has been made about the slight dip in giving in 2022. I do want to remind all of us that 2022 was the 2nd highest year on record for charitable giving. As we go beyond the numbers and reflect on the data story from the Giving USA data, touch upon your background and share what stands out to you as a few takeaways. So why don't we start with Stephanie?
Thank you, Brenda, and hi, everyone. I am really, really happy to be here, and thank you to Jaron and Michelle for that great presentation. My name is Stephanie Ellis-Smith. I use she, her pronouns. I am based in Seattle, the unceded territory of the Duwamish people. As Brenda, as you talked about, I am a CEO of Phila Engaged Giving, and we are a philanthropic advisory firm. We have offices based in Seattle and Chicago, and we work with national individuals, families across the country, helping them make more strategic decisions. I hope that I can influence these numbers going forward. That is our job, to help these numbers increase and go higher. But a little bit on my background, I come to this work very much with the lens I think that many of you all share. I'm from the nonprofit sector. Maybe like you, I'm one of the few folks who have loved fundraising and development work my entire career. But I've held just about every seat at the social sector table. I have been a nonprofit founder twice over, both organizations still running. I've been the COO of a B Corp, a foundation trustee, nonprofit trustee. So I would really like to think that I'm bringing that entire lens from all of those experiences to the work that I do and helping individuals and family move private wealth back to the public sector. And Brenda, just remind me, did you want me to say a little bit about my takeaways now?
Yeah, I would love it. Would you please, what are some of your takeaways from the data?
So I'm happy to, and I would guess maybe like all of you, I feel like my eyes and my mind is just sort of scrambling with all of this really interesting data. It's important to understand and to make sense out of, but I'll just sort of share a couple of things that really make the kind of land on me the strongest. One thing I want to say is, while we are a little bit nervous seeing these trends go down, I think it is important to remember that 2020 and 2021 were exceptional years. They shouldn't be, but they were. And so our trend going down in some ways is not necessarily surprising. So many folks, as we know, were galvanized to move in ways that they had never moved as far as donating before. So on one way, we can expect a little bit of leveling off there. I think the more important thing to think about is what is going to be happening in the next 2 to 3 years. And I think that's a big takeaway for all of us in the sector, is to keep the drive and the push going for all of these donors. The other thing that is, in a way, I'm not sort of surprised, and I think for next year, we ought to think about this too. We're moving into a presidential election year. People are going to be very distracted. There's going to be a lot of fundraising going on the political side, so we may expect that we still might be a little flat. Hopefully, we won't see another dip next year, but I think that is something to consider. But overall, and one of the charts that Jaron showed us, when we're looking at giving by inflation from 1982 to 2022, to remember that trend is still going up. And what's interesting to me is that it also mimics the stock market. I think sometimes a lot of us, when we're in the social sector, we like to think, oh, well, we're not a part of this, business capitalist world. We are smack dab in it. If you are not reading the business section every day, Wall Street Journal or the FT or the Economist, I think you're missing out on trends and what could be coming, because this is what our donors are looking at. This is the way they are thinking. And when there is, Jaron and Michelle talked about this, when there is a dip, if we're in an inflationary period, or conversely, if we are in a period where the stock market is booming, we are tied to the S&P. Should we be? Absolutely not. But here we are. And so when we are seeing gains in the stock market, that should be a signal for us to lean in a little bit harder and make a few extra calls, because honestly, people are feeling more flushed. So that's one thing that I would say. And maybe just the last bit that I might point out is this focus on the mega gifts, these gifts that are 500 million and more, and the slide that we saw about where the Buffetts and Arnolds and others are putting their funds. while those mega gifts are just 5% of the overall giving, individual giving, I wanted to just point out, not to be too cynical, but this is something that we need to also pay close attention to, where these gifts are going. Other than McKinsey Scott, these gifts are going to their private foundations. And so that is something that we just, I have a lot of opinions on that, but I wanted to just highlight that for everyone to also be a little shrewd and judicious when we're looking at how these gifts are being made and actually where they're going. They're not going directly to nonprofit organizations. So
Stephanie, thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments about the leading indicators. And while we are in the nonprofit sector, we should be paying attention to what's happening in the economy, because they really are leading indicators for philanthropy and generosity in our country. I'd like to now turn over to Alex to introduce himself and give his assessment of some takeaways from this data.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you very much, Brenda and everyone. My name is Alex Jakana, and I've been with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now this is my 8th year, and I am sitting in what I liberally describe as my home office. It's also it's a multi-purpose room, as you can see behind me, bookshelf, and wearing a jacket and a white shirt. I have been doing the work of public sector or public interest development for the better part of about 20 years. I started as a broadcast journalist, born and raised in Uganda, where I began the practice in Europe, and then now I reside in Seattle here in the United States. The work I've been doing at the Gates Foundation, when I bring that lens, the team I'm on right now is what we call a philanthropic partnerships team, and it specifically focuses on the philanthropic sector with the aim of inspiring and enabling givers at all levels to give more, give faster, and for more of that giving to go towards advancing equity or addressing inequities. Looking at the report and the numbers, Jaron, thank you very much, Michelle. It is unsurprising. That's the first thing I would say. The reason it was unsurprising were a couple. One, we knew that the 2 years preceding that were outliers, and those usually change. So we knew it was coming at some point. But secondly, to the point that Stephanie and everyone has said, the broader economic cycles tend to be the environment within which the philanthropic sector or charitable giving also plays. And so that also had a sort of drag effect on giving. I'll say a little more about what Stephanie highlighted, which is, should it be that way? And of course, the answer shouldn't be. But why shouldn't it? There are many reasons. But perhaps one that I'd reflect is looking at the broader, looking at sectors that we live in. We've got the public sector, you've got the private sector as sources of capital that would sort of push out. Within the private sector, sort of, you've got the philanthropic capital. So you've got investor capital that would be corporate. You've got public sector capital that policymakers will have the purse strings control over. And then you've got the philanthropic capital, charitable capital. And they all have attributes. The other two, which is public sector and corporate or public sector capital, is risk averse. It is investment capital. It treads lightly and carefully and will retreat at the slightest sight of any trouble. Philanthropic capital should be ideally courageous capital. It is money that people have already in their mind decided to give away. It should be money that is designed to take risks. And consequently, if that were true in practice, then we should have an inverse relation between the S&P 500 graph between 1982 and 2022 and that of giving, so that at times when things were getting tougher, those who are most vulnerable and in need of help would feel the pain more, and those who are giving would step up the giving. But as you know, if we hold the two graphs together right now, they really are moving in a parallel direction. That would be one reflection, the lack of surprise and why I think it should be turned the other way. The other thing that I'll probably talk about at a later point, Brenda, is now that we have this, now what? This is largely expected to be a decade of an upward trend in giving. We need to consider as well that when there are changes in monetary and fiscal policy and the macroeconomic, there's a lag effect before the effects kick in. And we now know that we're in a tightening phase with monetary policy, at least. Fiscal, will come to that in a minute. That effect is going to kick in over the next few years. And if that relationship between affluence and giving continues to be parallel, it may have some overcast implications for giving, but not necessarily. More on that later. Over.
Well, you certainly left us in a very provocative position, Alex, when we look at the upward trajectory and what we should expect relative to what lies ahead for philanthropy. Let's turn to Dilnaz to introduce herself and talk more about her work and her reactions to the data.
Sure. Thank you so much, Brenda and the Alford Group, for engaging us in this conversation, and also my esteemed panelists to being part of this today's learning opportunity. So my name is Dilnaz Waraich. I'm the president of the WF Fund. I'm calling in today from the homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations. Since 2016, the WF Fund has deployed over $26 million to uplift diverse communities by investing in building the capacity of nonprofit leaders and organizations. We're based in Chicago, and the WF Fund has buckets of givings that include religious pluralism, education, and human services. We just completed a 3-year study at the Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy, bringing together 25 Muslim-led nonprofits as we better understand what is collaboration. The study's name was called Community Collaboration Initiative. We're continuing to do our work with community foundations, family foundations, and a new storytelling initiative titled Inspired Generosity. So as I was listening to Stephanie and Alex speak, I also was thinking about our philanthropic journey at the WF Fund. And I thought about how, as an immigrant, as a Muslim, as an underserved girl that came to Chicago when I was 2 years old, that's when my philanthropic story started. It really started at my kitchen table. We used to sit, my sister and I, my mom and dad, the four of us, and we would talk about an aunt that needed $25 for a sewing machine, or a neighbor in India that my mom had that needed $100 for open heart surgery. But this is what philanthropy was for me in the 70s and 80s growing up, and how important those conversations were to where I am today. So I think about how the WF Fund, as we are going through and better understanding the U.S. Giving Report 2022, it actually fills me with a lot of hope, with a lot of, wow, what's next? Because I see the world and philanthropy and the philanthropic sector kind of reimagining, what does it mean to be philanthropic? What does it mean to be generous? We're redefining so much that was set forth for us previously. We're also realizing, as Michelle Jaron had mentioned, that there's different areas that we need to look at. This pandemic has opened our world, it has transformed our world, and we're also better understanding how Americans are inherently giving individuals. So when we look at the trends, one of the trends that gives me hope is how we're giving internationally. So for the war in Ukraine, we gave so much, and we gave very generously because no one asked us to. We wanted our community in Ukraine to do well. I think about the earthquake in Turkey. We rushed to help the individuals in Turkey. That was a biblical earthquake. The floods in Pakistan. We realize Americans are empathetic people, and no one needs to ask us or make us feel bad about giving. We just give because that's the type of people we are. So when I read this report, I'm filled with hope, and I'm also filled with, I don't want to live in fear, and I don't want someone to force me to give. I want someone to just maybe, help and educate me and maybe introduce me to some new organizations. But that's why when I was reading the report, and it is a definitely meaty report, you realize over and over again, yes, there's areas we need to tweak. Yes, there's areas we need to work on and make sure that we better understand giving and how giving is done through foundations and DAFs. But these are also areas that give me hope and energy to move forward with. One other area that I'm curious about with the report is we talk quite a bit about how giving is a little bit less this year, donors are a little bit less this year, but we have also learned that there's an increase in DAF and foundation giving. As this increase is having a change in our community foundations, maybe we're asking the wrong question, or maybe we need to ask a different question. Could we be asking, sure, funds individually are decreasing, but funds through DAFs and foundations are increasing. So are individuals opening more DAFs? Are individuals opening more foundations? And how would that look differently in our report? So these are just questions that the W Fund, we explore, we wonder, but we really walk away with a sense of hope because America is a very giving community.
Thank you so much, Dilnaz. And I really love your optimism and hope for philanthropy. And one of the things that you touched on was how philanthropy entered your life as a two-year-old and sitting around the kitchen table with your family. What's not tracked in the Giving USA data is the generosity of giving outside of monetary contributions and contributions not recorded through tax records. Every day, people are donating their time, their tithes, their aid, their advocacy, their talent, their dollars, leveraging their networks in support of the public good. How do we change the narrative of what is counted as philanthropy and who is valued as a philanthropist? Who would like to kick us off with a response?
Well,
Stephanie?
I'm happy
Okay.
to kick that off. Yeah, like all of these subjects, I was going to say, well, I feel very passionately about this. Well, I feel passionately about all of it. So I'll start this time and then I'll cede the floor to my co-panelists the next time. I think this is the work of all of us on this webinar, is to lift up those folks and those individuals who are doing all of those things that you just named, Brenda. Of course, the study, and rightly so, it's absolutely nothing against the study. We need this data and it's incredibly important. Yet we also have to remember that this is tracking tax incentivized giving. And that is very specific. Not everyone is giving related to tax. It's the easiest thing for us to track. So it's important and it's very, very reasonable. But there are a number of folks who give, the way our firm calls it, a values-aligned giving, values-based giving, where that does include volunteerism. There are a number of clients that we have had who try to support either something unique or different, whether they have a C3 status or not. Our tack is, if this is in line with your values, if this is important to you, just give the money, just give it. I mean, and particularly for folks who are much higher on the economic bracket, they're conditioned by wealth managers and financial folks to let them think that giving via tax and so that you can be counted and these kind of stuff is the only way to give. It's the most efficient way to give, and it not always is. You think about folks who are contributing art collections, who are collecting art, buying art. In our minds, all of that counts. Whether it can be counted as tax deductible or not, I think that these are the types of things that we want to lift up, and whether you're a part of a nonprofit or you're supporting donors in any other kind of way, is giving those non-tax focused givers the floor, a lift up, to let them know that those kinds of giving are not just needed, but also very, very appreciated, because it's also incredibly inspirational. Especially when you see, I mean, all of us do this, highlighting key volunteers and the volunteers who've been at organizations for 10, 20 years, all of those types of things are just so meaningful. And it also expands the community of who we consider to be philanthropists. It's very inclusive, and it makes people feel, because all donors, regardless of where they are on your donor roles, everyone, they're giving ultimately because they want to be a part of something and they want to be connected to something. And so I think that the values aligned giving is a really kind of easy way to sort of help build community around an issue or a cause area where people can come together giving what they can. The last little bit that I'll just add to this, to think about increasing movement. And I saw this, and I don't think I've seen this before in the Giving USA data about giving to individuals or organizations like Give Directly. Like, this is a new trend. And again, I think this is helping to open this idea of broader philanthropy that's not tax advantage.
Thank you for noticing that, Stephanie. That is a new
GoFundMe.
area. That is a new area indeed that we've started tracking. Dilnaz, what are your thoughts as we look at inclusive generosity?
Sure, appreciate that. Thank you, Stephanie, for your insights, because I totally agree. I think I always grappled with the word philanthropist, because I'd say, about 5 years ago, people started calling me a philanthropist, and I wasn't sure if they were like insulting me or saying something positive. And I'd be like, wait, why are they calling me that? Because I had a lot of history with the word philanthropy, and I thought it really meant it was an older white individual, unfortunately doing harm to the city that I live in. So I did question that term. And as I feel more comfortable with that term, I don't call myself a philanthropist. I call myself a philanthropic advocate. And when I think of a philanthropic advocate, it's a person that walks in partnership with their partners, with their grantees, listens to their grantees and their partners, and understands the philanthropic individual doesn't have, or the person giving the larger allocation doesn't have a knowledge of the community. But what does it mean to sit with the community and really understand community-based approach, making sure that we're sitting and we're listening to these approaches and making sure that we aren't making the decisions that are, giving this allocation, but the actual community and the philanthropic individual is having a symbiotic relationship. There's a systematic approach to this, and making sure that we are seeing each others as takers and givers, and doing this systematically was really important to me. So I reframed to the word, not that I'm a philanthropist, but I'm more of a philanthropic advocate. And also to talk a little bit more about the history, again, with philanthropy in the US. So Stephanie, when you talk about like the individual giving, it's not new, right? Because and I know our moms and dads individually gave, $10 to someone, gave $25 to someone, and no one tracked it. No one got a tax deductible, incentive through that. We just did it because we knew we needed to do it. We just did it because our faith asked us to give it. So what does it mean not to like do something new and start tracking it, but just continue tracking it, and also talk about these conversations? Because I think about how 400 years ago, when enslaved individuals came to our land, that's how they used to give. They didn't stop giving because they were enslaved individual. They still had generosity. They still had the purpose of the work they wanted to do. No matter what hardships they had, they were still philanthropic. And you don't need to be philanthropic to write a six-figure check. You can be philanthropic because you smiled at your grandmother, or you had the lemonade stand outside and you raised $10 and you gave that $10 to your church. You can be philanthropic because you at Girl Scout or Boy Scout were able to like help someone build a home together. These are really new initiatives. That's why I'm really hopeful with the Generosity Commission, with the Giving Report, because I think we're redefining it. We're also really understanding it doesn't have to always be so difficult to give. It could just be emptying of our pockets. Let's just empty our pockets.
I love your distinction and coining this new language around philanthropic advocate. And I want to ask you, Dilnaz, when you talk about being an advocate, and you talked about not seeing yourself as a philanthropist, Stephanie touched on donor education. Oftentimes, as development professionals, we think donors already have a set plan. They know exactly what they want to do, who's in their top 1, their top 3, top 5, etc. Can you just share a little bit more about your journey as a donor and how you educated yourself about the art of giving or the business of giving?
So I know there's a lot of development people, executive directors, philanthropic advocates out here in the on the call that we have. But a lot of times people think, oh, donors, they're just, they're just this new entity. They're you're not really hearing their story. So in 2016, when my father-in-law passed away and we had this transfer of wealth, and we know there's going to be large transfers of wealth occurring in the next few years. It took me about 2 years. It took me 2 years to really understand this is where I needed to be. This is, the ownership that I have. But in those 2 years, there was a lot of imposter syndrome. There was a lot of, I don't deserve this. There was a lot of guilt. Then came the journey of like, okay, I got this. This is the platform I have. How am I going to do this well? And that's where the education came from. Literally, I went to every single webinar, every single, conversation about philanthropy. And then I said, I just need to get a certificate. I need to get a degree, and I need to make sure I understand philanthropy from the fundraising point of view, as well as the history of philanthropy in the US and internationally. So taking classes at Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy was so important for me to make sure that I'm embedded in this work. And through that journey, then we understood what is strategic philanthropy. It's not just, these high wealth individuals giving large amounts to just a few entities, but it's really getting out there, Brenda, and listening to stories. When I think about the stories I heard from a woman that came from Afghanistan and she had domestic violence issues, sitting with her, listening to her cry, hearing her story, and then bringing it back into my kitchen table, telling my sons, hey, this is what I heard. What are your thoughts? Then going out to a food pantry, taking our family there, making sure we deposit cans, making sure that we get people what they need. It's such an important journey. That proximity is so important. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to make sure we're not in this ivory tower, just collecting data and research, because I know philanthropy is very much invested in data and research, and that is very important, but we have to be proximate to our clients, to our participants, to our community.
Thank you so much. And I also want to just applaud our attendees. I'm seeing some wonderful comments in the chat. Thank you for your affirming chat this morning, this afternoon, the gratitude report. So thank you all for your great participation. Alex, I'd like to now turn to you. You talked about your work in terms of at the Gates Foundation, focused on working with givers at all levels to give more, give faster. Can you touch on that work, and how did that come to be with the Gates Foundation, that this would be a focus and they would have a team of individuals focused on everyday givers?
That's an excellent question, Brenda. And I just want to echo your gratitude for our attendees and the comments. Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Now, I'll answer that question, and then I will also say something about what Dilnaz has said and Stephanie.
Sure.
So let's start with the team that I'm a part of, and what does it do, and how did this come across? So when Bill and Melinda decide to give away the vast majority of their wealth, they step into giving and begin the foundation, the Bill and Melinda Foundation, and identify where they want to give. Global health and development, and issues that by far disproportionately affect the world's poorest and vulnerable. Now, there was a lot to learn. This is to your point, Dilnaz, that was not easily available in terms of teachers, examples, and precedent. Now, I know someone to say, oh, come on, Alex. There's a long history of philanthropy in the United States. The Rockefellers and the families that come before that. And that is true. If you decide that you're going to start giving today on a large philanthropic scale, and you want to give to the Royal Philharmonic, you want to give to the Harvard Endowment, you have a long history to borrow from in terms of precedent. You have a great ecosystem of advisors that have been around and advising very well. But what happens if your intention is to deploy most of your capital to the world's poorest and vulnerable, global health and global development, and you really want to do it at scale? Where are the precedents? Where are the examples? Where is the support system? And the learning journey led to a place where that this should not happen to other donors again. And so this team is partly a product of that need to create a team that therefore goes in to inspire, to enable, to support givers at all levels, yes, and also givers at the peer level in terms of our co-chairs, which would be ultra high net worth individuals. So when they decide to step in and rapidly deploy, because this is the other great thing about philanthropy. We know that 5%, we saw that came from ultra high net worth individuals. Philanthropy as a whole plays a fantastic role in transitions. When we're looking at societal progression, you come to a point where you have a really difficult challenge, there's a potential for a solution, but remember, all the capital that is required to jump in has to be risk averse to kickstart the possible solution finding. And public purse holders and private sector holders may be reluctant to step into that place. And this is where philanthropic capital can come in. Incremental philanthropic capital is good, but if you really want to push a transition, you sort of want full force capital. And this is one of those moments where that 5% can be really great. It can be like $200 million that goes into a vaccine, and then you have proof that you can develop a vaccine in 3 months, which no one had known about. And that $200 million then gives the corporate space comfort to jump in and do whatever they want to do. So this team will work to help funders have an ecosystem that is helpful for them, create donor education, peer networks, seed and support those, data availability, giving opportunities for many funders who step into a situation and say, I don't know, what do I do? I want to give to gender, but it's universe sized, and also create support for those who support givers, you know, whether it's Stephanie and her peers and her colleagues, and finding out how can we create a more collaborative ecosystem for givers who want to give and give well. The other thing that we do, and this is where I'll speak to and borrow from Dilnaz's story, we are seeing a great wealth transfer. Now, this has been talked about a lot, and there are a couple of things that are going to happen with this transfer. This is well documented, and you'll find it anywhere. One is, between now and 2045, in the US alone, it's estimated that $84 trillion is going to move from baby boomers to the next generation. Just take a moment and let that number sink in. It's already happening, and we have a story right now in Dilnaz. The other thing is, between now and 2030, about 30 trillion of that money will be in the hands of women and girls. So they will either be women who are now making decisions around how the wealth is deployed, or they'll be the primary wealth income generators and wealth holders in households. The implications cannot be overstated there. Dilnaz will probably tell you her own story and the story of her family and their philanthropic journey, the evolution, and how much of that can be attributed to her coming in now and beginning to take that story forward. And you've got to find out, there's certain attributes that women givers have relative to their male counterparts, and this is going to have an impact on the sector of giving. These changes are not going to happen only as a rise of women philanthropists in the US, but even in the world. There are multiple reports out there. The Gemini report, there's a McKinsey report out there. Citi has done a report as well, looking at the rise of women, and the number is put at about 70% of household income being in the hands of women and girls. I can't overstate how positive a change that is going to be because of the attributes of women givers, and how this is the time to begin to think about how we engage donors, what sort of products we put outside to support the giving ecosystem, and make the most of this, development that's already underway and is going to pick up. So I'll pause there. I know that Stephanie and Dilnaz will probably want to jump in there, say, think, mull over, and so I'll just throw it to my co-panelists.
Alex, I'd love to ask you, what would you do to engage donors as you know this wealth of knowledge about transfer of wealth, women and girls taking over this type of giving? I'm curious, what would you do if you were able to, move things forward?
So first of all, the things we learn, the first thing is to learn. And that would be the first thing, is to learn what it drives giving, and the distinctions. The second thing, and this is what we're seeing, is hearing from givers themselves. One of the biggest impact on their giving practices is peer networks. And I think, Stephanie, you mentioned around that, a community of givers. No one influences you more than your peers. Whether it comes to sports, sportsmen and women are more influenced by other sportsmen and women. What exercise regimen are you doing? If they hear from another sports person that this is how many reps I do, they're probably going to start doing, this is what I drink. And the same thing is true with givers. If one giver hears from another giver that this is something they're giving. So that was one thing. And how that translates is the value of peer networks, and especially peer networks for women givers. So finding a space for women givers to come together, because a lot of what you talked about, Dilnaz, that imposter syndrome, it's interesting that what we have had, and this is anecdotal, is that it features quite a bit in women who are next gen. And by next gen, I'm talking stage, not age. So next gen could be a 50-year-old woman who has a wealth event, either through bereavement, or she's sold a business, or a divorce. And now she was always a part of the wealthy family, but now she's making the decisions. Or next gen could be a 20 to 30 who is in the line and is going to be G2. But that imposter syndrome, sometimes we've had more, comes up. And women, I've been in some of the sessions where I've had the women talk about the value of being in a peer network where there were other women who had been in the process of giving longer, who were facing the same challenges, they were facing the family dynamics, again, the gender inequalities and the gender gaps we talk about go right into our homes, and that sense of community. So that would be one, seed and support peer networks, especially for women. The second one would be focus on intergenerational giving. Next gen women have an approach that is different when it comes to definition of change, how the problems are even defined. When we talk of equity or inequity, there might be a difference in opinion between the next gen and the current wealth holding generation. And sometimes it's helpful to create a space or to be intentional about programming for next gen wealth holders, especially if most of them are going to be women and girls. And then the third and final one would be, I'd encourage anyone with a voice to find a way of influencing the wealth advisor network, that sort of support network. It has historically been a mostly male-serving system. And you mentioned that image you had in your mind, Dilnaz, of what a philanthropist was, a sort of wealthy old man. And the network that supports them tended to be that way. And it's a network that had subconsciously or consciously been programmed to work towards wealth preservation, which is not what philanthropic capital works towards. And so when women givers come in, women givers are more likely to give donations without restriction and to give more quickly. And we've got good examples of that, Mackenzie Scott's, etc. And then the ecosystem isn't quite set up to receive that. So it's not uncommon to see that when a wealth event happens and a woman rises to decision-making, one of the first changes may be to fire the wealth advisor. So maybe we need to think about how we change that so that it's more conducive for women wealth holders. And I'll stop there. Brenda, I can see you.
No, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie. I love it when the panel takes over. So Stephanie, what's your response to the construct of wealth advisors and this community of givers?
Well, first, just can I +1 everything that I've heard? I do love this panel, and I'm really happy to say that this discussion here really has mimicked our first go-around that we had together, just sort of getting to know each other. So I'm really happy that our panelists get a chance to see this too, because this discussion is so incredibly rich. And Alex, thank you for initiating the conversation about the great wealth transfer, because I was going to do the same. And this 84 trillion number by 2061 is real. It is the number that everyone in the wealth advisory community is talking about. 30 trillion of that in the hands of women. But also I would say even more broadly for this panel, the estimate is of that 84 that is going to be transferred for the boomers to Gen X and millennials and younger, 12 trillion of that is likely to be earmarked for charitable purposes. So this is for all of us, a $12 trillion number. And to your point, Alex, who is holding that? Women, younger people, next gen women. I like what you said, Alex, stage, not necessarily age, but also the age, younger people. And we are seeing that increasingly. Most of these people, and here's the other big thing to consider, the way people give are completely different if you're the wealth creator versus an inheritor, a wealth inheritor.
Yeah.
This next generation are going to be inheritors. And what is very different there is that they have, they tend to be more progressive. They tend to have more, a broader view on what philanthropic capital can actually do. And it's nothing against the wealth creators. I mean, most of the time their heads are down and they're just kind of pushing it out and working on being successful and generating this wealth. But it's the ones who are receiving it for just having to been born that way or for some sort of lucky kind of event. It's a completely different mindset of how you think about those philanthropic dollars. And that's something that I would offer as just a thoughtful takeaway for this group on the webinar, to think about that difference and what does that mean and with those donors that you have. Are they creators or are they inheritors? And you approach them a little bit differently. The other point that I wanted to just sort of touch on as well, you said about the wealth advisory community, and it is a problematic. We talk about this all the time amongst my colleagues and peers in the philanthropic advisory community. We are often seen, and as everyone here on this webinar and panel would too, many times, not by all wealth advisors, but many see us as competition. Obviously, you know that they are compensated based on assets under management. And here we come, coming to their clients, convincing them to decrease the assets that they are managing. So there is an inherent tension there. And I think while donor education is going to be extremely important and always will be important, I think for us to continue advancing the work that we all are doing, I think trying to build meaningful and productive relationships with these, frankly, gatekeepers in the wealth advisory community is also going to be very, very important. Because from my perspective as a philanthropic advisor with my clients, and I work very closely with their wealth advisors, their tax attorneys, and their estate planning attorneys, they are slowly starting to realize, and particularly with this wealth transfer and the younger inheritors, women, folks who are coming into this wealth, they are not so interested in grandpa's wealth advisor who's just telling them what they can and can't do. I'll just give you a very brief anecdote of a woman that we had worked with, a young woman, inheritor. She comes from a very large, prominent global family. She was 32, just getting her own inheritance together. She went to her wealth advisor, who was her grandparents, and they had basically kept this family for her entire life. His advice to her, and I'm not kidding at all, his advice to her was, don't do anything. You need to focus on finding a husband. We will handle your money. And so what I hear when I get these clients, and she comes to me and she goes, what am I supposed to do with this person? You find somebody else. And this man just lost, talk about losing some assets under management. He just lost quite a lot. But this is more and more going to be happening. And these advisors are starting to realize, well, wait a minute. I'm going to have to be doing some different listening. If I want to hold on to my clients, if I want to keep this next generation close to me, I need to actually learn a little bit more about the interests, the issue areas and causes that they are interested in. Because if I'm not listening and if I'm not paying attention, and if I can't help connect them with organizations, connect them with advisors, I'm going to lose out on these clients. And it's starting to hit them very, very seriously. So I think that's something to think about. And I think that's something that all of us sort of in, whether it's development, working with donors in any ways to really kind of bring everyone together around what this gatekeeping is going to mean, because it's going to be a new day in about a decade. We're going to really, really see it's going to be completely different.
So I'm really curious, Stephanie and Alex, I think you guys bring up such great points. And for me, like a lifelong learner, I just realized that there's so much learning I need to do this work so strategically, because it's not just about giving and giving rapidly. Like with the WF Fund, we really think about humility and urgency. So how do you do this with humility, but do it with urgency, right? So I'm curious, when you talk about this wealth advisory community, who needs to be in that wealth advisory community? How do we get more of those started? I'm also curious about like how collaboration is the new competition. So collaboration, how do we collaborate more? How do we see each other as allies in this work, opposed to seeing each other as, oh no, he's my competitor, exactly what you said, Stephanie. But I also think about an African proverb that we use regularly in all the work that we do is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So how do we go together in this work? So I know you guys have been doing this for years, but Brenda, Stephanie, Alex, help me understand, how do we collaborate more? How do we do intentional collaborations? Because I know I work mostly with organizations that have budgets less than $2 million. These are nonprofit organizations that are doing extremely good mission-driven work, but their budgets are small. They don't have access to large philanthropic dollars. If you don't have access, you cannot grow your budget in the next 5 years, next 10 years. So how do we bring more of these smaller nonprofits to these conversations and further collaborate?
I think that's a great question, and I love collaboration is the new competition. Alex, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Collaboration, yeah. So I'm a passionate advocate of partnership and collaboration. And Dilnaz, this is an excellent question and point you raise. So how do we foster more collaboration? I see it playing out in two fields. There's collaboration amongst givers and donors, and then there's collaboration amongst fund recipients, because collaboration on that end as well can also amplify the effect of what would otherwise have been a minimal amount of funds. So let's start with collaboration amongst funders. Because we, and I speak as a foundation employee and based on the data we have, because we have seen the effect that peer networks can have on giving, either in helping people give smartly or give more or give faster or all of the above. Peer networks are a good place to start to bring individuals together. Now, the problem is, over time, those peer networks fall into the competition trap. So this peer network starts competing with this peer network, then you have the problem again, and you have one of the solutions I think that is worth testing is, because of the power of in-person, putting people in the same space and seeing what organically comes out, is collaborative infrastructure. And I'll use that as a coined term. And by that, for example, I'd give, how can givers or a group of givers or people interested in the community look at, say, an event calendar and create space on an event calendar, a 12-month event calendar, where there's space for the peer networks, either heads or whatever, to just be in the same space occasionally, maybe once every quarter, and 2 days, have a meal, talk about. Because once they're in the same space, begin talking, find someone who's expert at facilitating. The first one breaks ice. The second one, they get a little bit, they begin to know each other. Expertly designed, facilitated groups, which start with, who are you? Why do you do this work? They begin to see each other in each other. This then is transported back into the network, and they're more open to emails that come in that say, hey, you know, we're thinking of doing this thing. Would your members and our members get together? So that would be on the funder side, and one example of collaborative infrastructure using event calendars. On the recipient end, one of the things that makes it hard for recipients of philanthropic or charitable dollars to collaborate is that if I collaborate, how much of the outcome will be attributed to me relative to the person I worked with, because I need that attribution for the next round of fundraising. One of the things that some funders have tried to do is to use the dollars they give as an incentive for collaboration. For example, I am calling out for, I've got an offer, here's a problem we're going to solve, I'd like to invite proposals, and I'm only asking, or I'm only going to consider applications that have 2 or more organizations working together. So if you submit a joint application as recipients or practitioners of 2 or more, then that will make the shortlist for consideration. And so people come in and each one is giving, and we've seen this happen. One of the other things we've tried to do is to find the smaller organization that is more proximal, that would otherwise not have the expertise or the skill to write a really great, proposal. If we make them the primary funds holder in partnership with a bigger, more experienced organization, maybe let's say Global South, Global North, then you give the money to the organization in Nairobi, and they're subgranting to the organization in DC. It's a collaborative effort, but the power sits with the smaller one. Then, and also because they are proximal, they may not be as big and expansive, but they're the proximal partner. The funds from the funder incentivize the collaboration, and then hopefully we can keep that cycle going until you reach a point where you can slowly begin to pull the funds out and the thing stays together, sort of like the clutch and the engine, that sort of thing. So those are a couple of things that I'd say on collaboration. Now, of course, with collaboration, everything is a lot easier to say than done. Stephanie.
I will not add to that. I think that is perfect. And I will second all of those thoughts. Brenda.
But Dilnaz, I'd love to hear your story in the evolution of the giving of your family foundation when you came in, especially as a woman giver, maybe not as a woman giver, but when you came in, how did things change from the way giving was happening before to the way it's happening now, and maybe the way it will happen in the future?
Brenda, do we have time?
Can you do it in 1 minute? Because I have a wrap-up question. I did promise our attendees that we would leave time for a few questions, but we really want to hear your response to this one.
Sure. I'm going to say, the business that my father-in-law created, and, we as a family have grown in the last 9 years, really started from a lot of hard work, a lot of very driven, practices that got us to where we are today in 2023. But when my father-in-law did pass away, we looked a lot at his giving, and my family just sat at the kitchen table and we kept going, it's so not the way we as American Muslims individuals want to move forward. It was 100% given to men because that's who my father-in-law really connected well with. It was 100% given to pretty much international causes, a lot of causes that he felt were, very important. To respect him and his efforts too, we definitely we still till this day continue giving because that is really important for our family, to respect our elders. And he was an amazing elder, a role model for our family. But we moved forward. We looked at how important religious pluralism is for us to really understand faiths. I'm the first Muslim board member at Catholic Theological Union. We're the largest Muslim donors at Chicago Theological Seminary. It was really important for Muslims, Catholics, people of faith, and people of no faith to have these conversations. So really, faith drove us to make sure that we're having conversations in all spaces. And how do we get out of our silos and share Stephanie's story, share Brenda's story, come back and say, oh, I connect with Alex and this is how I connect with Alex, but making sure that we have these shared stories and having these continued conversations. And it's not one-off, right? It's just constantly continuing these conversations. But the way I knew I kind of hit success in my family was about 2 years ago, when we were having our allocation meeting, and my son at that point must have been 22. And he goes, Mom, what percentage of our giving is being done to executive directors that are women? I want to make sure that we're giving to, just as many women or maybe even more women organizations. And that just made me pause, and it made me smile because I didn't have to ask that question. He asked that question, and we had been collecting data, and these are conversations that we have on a regular basis. So I think, again, when you talk about collaboration, when you talk about intergenerational giving, peer networks, no one needs to be having a forceful hand to do this, but how do we do it with just intentionality and putting it on the agenda?
Thank you. That was
Great.
brilliant.
You know, I'm taking some questions now from our Q&A panel. And Stephanie, there's a question where our audience would like to know more about the approach to wealth creators. You talked about those who are inheriting. What would be your advice relative to wealth creators? What should we be keeping in mind as we approach those particular donors?
Sure, thank you for that. And just let me say as I begin that these are broad strokes. Not everyone is the same. So let's keep that in mind. And for all of our donors and the way that we interact with folks and the way we get donors to move is to be good listeners. I just want to say that first, is to really be keen and thoughtful listeners. That said, one of a broad general attribute of that may be a little bit different for some wealth creators versus wealth inheritors. If you think about the business person or the successful person that has made a tremendous amount of wealth, how did they get there? Their determination, their focus. They clearly have been rewarded for their success, so they may or may not, but generally may come into spaces feeling much more good about their role, what they can offer. They tend to have a lot more confidence. If they're going to be involved in your organization, they really do see that they have a lot to bring, and they're much more tactical because they have been in a place where they have been rewarded for doing and then being successful at what they've decided to do. They tend to be more decisive, particularly if they're the bosses, if they're CEOs, they're decisive, they're used to being in charge. I'm not saying that you have to cater to that, but I am saying that you would be wise to just be aware of that kind of dynamic and maybe perhaps adjust your approach, or sometimes maybe depending on how intense, if a person is very intense but has coming from a good place, maybe you want to limit the options that someone may have if you know that you can't necessarily respond to everything that they may have to offer, or all of the ways that they may want to be involved. So my takeaway with that is just being a keen listener and adjusting how you think someone is coming to you, adjusting a little bit to make sure that they can actually respond and hear what you're saying. And I think wealth creators have a little bit of a different perspective in that way. And sometimes, they, not always, but they can sometimes come in a little hot, and you just maybe want to be prepared for that.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I just want to thank all of you this afternoon. I've picked up some new language. We've heard about courageous capital, being a philanthropic advocate, the business of philanthropy, next generation, stage, not age. Looking at different ways of approaching individuals of wealth, those who are wealth creators and those who are inheritors. Looking at humility and urgency, collaboration is the new competition, peer networks. So in our final few minutes, I'd like for each one of you to just share what excites you the most about the future of philanthropy.
Dilnaz, why don't you go first?
Yes.
What excites me is just redefining it, making sure that we redefine it and everyone's at the table. And as they're at the table, we're respectful and we're listening and we're engaging.
Thank you.
Stephanie?
Thank you. I would say I would agree with that. And I'd say the fact that the playing field is wide open. I think everyone we're sort of dropping barriers. And I think people are increasingly more open to how we define what impact really is going to be.
Right. So the glass is not half empty, right? We talk about a playing field wide open. Alex?
What excites me the most is the rise of women as wealth owners and philanthropists. That is going to redefine the sector and possibly a number of economies. I'd say, dare I say, even the global economy. So that's one. The other thing is the momentum that the appetite for collaboration is gaining. It's tricky, but if there is momentum behind it, we'll blast through.
Thank you all so very much. Thank you, Michelle, Jaron, Alex, Dilnaz, Stephanie. You can see why we put this wonderful panel together. I know we could go on for another hour, but we are at time. And we just want to, again, thank you all for the great work that you're doing in touching lives, changing communities, redefining who is a philanthropist and what is counted as philanthropy. So we look forward to staying in touch. Lucinda, is there something real quickly you want to just share as we sign off?
Just some reminders. If you want to purchase the full Giving USA report at the 30% discount, send us an email at info@alford.com. We will send you a link to do so. When this concludes, you will be immediately prompted to fill out a survey. It's 4 questions. It's really short. Please provide us with feedback. We would love to hear from you. And if we did not have a chance to answer your questions today, this was such a robust conversation. And thank you so much for the participation in the chat. If you still have a question, please get in touch with us. We'd love to continue the conversation. And again, info@alford.com is the best way to get a hold of us. So thank you all so much. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, presenters.
Thank you. And just to remind everyone, this session was recorded, so you will be receiving a copy of it. So again, there's so much rich information that you can go back and replay it and process it and share it with your leadership. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day. We look forward to our next journey together. Take care.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.